dead.
Long before the world knew the name Judy Garland, before the standing ovations and the bright lights of Hollywood, she was simply a little girl growing up in a world that demanded far too much from someone so young. Judy didn't really have what most people would call a normal childhood. From the time she was very small, she was already on stage, performing in front of crowds while other children her age were playing outside or going to school. Applause became a regular part of her life before she even fully understood what fame meant. People around her quickly noticed something special. Her voice was powerful, emotional, and far beyond her years. Audiences loved her, but in Hollywood, talent often came with a price. When Judy was still a teenager, she signed a contract with the legendary studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, known to the world as MGM. At the time, MGM was one of the most powerful film studios in the industry. Signing with them seemed like a dream come true. For Judy, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. But that opportunity also came with strict control. The studio didn't just manage her career, it managed her life. Executives decided what she should eat, how much she should weigh, when she should sleep, and how many hours she should work. Judy was expected to stay thin, energetic, and camera-ready at all times. The pressure was constant. Filming schedules were intense, often stretching late into the night. To keep up with the demanding workload, the studio doctors gave her pills to stay awake during long shoots. Then, when the day was finally over and she needed rest, she was given different pills to help her fall asleep. At first, it seemed like just part of the job, a way to keep the production running smoothly. But for a young teenager whose body and mind were still developing, this routine quietly created something far more dangerous. The cycle of stimulants and sleeping pills slowly became part of her daily life. What started as a studio solution to keep a young star performing eventually turned into a dependency that would follow Judy Garland for many years. It was a hidden struggle behind the smiles, the songs, and the applause. To the world, she looked like a rising star, but behind the scenes, she was a teenager carrying a weight no child should ever have to bear. Extreme pressure as a young star. When people think about Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz, they usually picture the bright smile, the sparkling ruby slippers, and the magical journey down the yellow ribbon road. But behind that unforgettable performance was a teenage girl carrying a weight far heavier than anyone in the audience could see. During the filming of The Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland was only 16 years old. At an age when most teenagers were worrying about school, friends, and discovering who they were, Judy was trapped inside the demanding machinery of the Hollywood studio system. She had signed a contract with the powerful studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, better known as MGM, and that contract gave the studio enormous control over nearly every part of her life. Executives believed Judy had incredible talent, but they also believed she didn't fit the image of the perfect young star. Instead of nurturing her confidence, they constantly criticized her appearance. Studio bosses insisted she stay extremely thin, far thinner than what was healthy for a growing teenager. Her meals were carefully monitored, and sometimes she was pressured to eat very little just to maintain the body shape the studio demanded. The pressure didn't stop with her appearance. The work schedule was brutal. Long filming days stretched late into the night, followed by rehearsals, recordings, and publicity appearances. Sleep became a luxury she rarely enjoyed. The expectation was simple: perform perfectly, no matter how exhausted you felt. For a 16-year-old girl, that kind of pressure could be overwhelming. Judy was surrounded by adults who treated her less like a child and more like a product that had to succeed at all costs. Instead of encouragement, she often heard criticism. Instead of comfort, she felt constant scrutiny. Over time, that environment began to chip away at her self-esteem. Even though audiences would later celebrate her as one of the most talented performers of her generation, Judy often struggled to see that greatness in herself. The constant pressure made her feel insecure about her looks, her abilities, and her place in Hollywood. It's one of the great ironies of film history. While Judy Garland was helping create one of the most beloved movies ever made, she was quietly battling doubts and emotional strain behind the scenes. The girl who would inspire millions with her voice and courage on screen was in reality a teenager trying to survive a system that demanded perfection long before she had the chance to simply be young. Struggles with addiction. The truth is, Judy Garland's struggles with addiction didn't begin in a dark alley or a reckless moment of rebellion. They began quietly, inside the walls of the Hollywood studio system. By the time Garland became a worldwide sensation in The Wizard of Oz, the damage had already begun. As a teenager working for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, she was placed on a brutal schedule. Long filming days, endless rehearsals, publicity appearances. There was almost no time to rest. To keep up with the pace, studio doctors gave her pills to stay awake. Then, when the day finally ended, she was given more pills to help her sleep. At first, it seemed like just part of the job. But over time, those pills became something far more dangerous. What began as studio assistance slowly turned into dependence. As Garland grew older, the medications that once helped her function became something she felt she couldn't live without. The cycle was hard to escape. When the pills stopped working the same way, stronger ones were introduced. Alcohol soon joined the mix, and the effects on her life were devastating. Behind the dazzling performances and standing ovations, Garland was fighting a private war. The pressure, exhaustion, and dependency pushed her to emotional breaking points. Friends and colleagues would later describe moments when she seemed overwhelmed, exhausted, and deeply fragile. There were emotional breakdowns that made it difficult for her to keep moving forward at the pace Hollywood demanded. Her career began to suffer as well. Studios grew hesitant to hire her because they feared missed rehearsals or unpredictable behavior. Projects fell apart, opportunities disappeared. Even though audiences still adored her voice and talent, maintaining steady work became incredibly difficult. At the same time, financial problems began to pile up. Despite earning enormous sums during her career, Garland often found herself in serious debt. Medical bills, legal troubles, and unstable work created a cycle that became harder and harder to break. Yet through it all, something remarkable remained. Even in the middle of personal chaos, Judy Garland could still step onto a stage and deliver a performance that left audiences speechless. Her voice still carried the same emotion, the same vulnerability that had captivated the world when she was young. In many ways, her struggles only deepened the feeling in her performances. Because when Judy Garland sang, you weren't just hearing a song. You were hearing the sound of someone fighting to survive. Troubled relationships and marriages. Love was something she chased her entire life, but somehow it always seemed just out of reach. Behind the dazzling performances, the standing ovations, and the bright lights of Hollywood, Judy Garland's personal life was filled with emotional storms. To the public, she was a star. But in private, she was often a woman searching desperately for stability, affection, and someone who truly understood her. Garland married 5 times throughout her life. Each marriage began with hope, the belief that this time things would be different, that this relationship would finally give her the peace she had been longing for since childhood. But again and again, those hopes slowly faded. One of her most well-known marriages was to Vincente Minnelli. Their relationship seemed promising in the beginning. Minnelli was respected in Hollywood, calm, creative, and deeply involved in filmmaking. When they married in 1945, many believed the relationship might finally give Garland the stability she needed. During their marriage, Garland gave birth to their daughter, Liza Minnelli, who would later become one of the most celebrated performers of her generation. Even as a child, people around them could see that Liza had inherited her mother's extraordinary talent. Friends remembered moments where Garland would look at her daughter with pride and say softly, "She's going to be a star someday. I can feel it." But despite the joy of motherhood, Garland's marriage to Minnelli eventually collapsed under pressure. The strain of fame, personal struggles, and emotional instability made the relationship difficult to sustain. By 1951, the marriage ended in divorce. Unfortunately, this pattern continued throughout her life. Garland's later marriages also struggled under the weight of her fame, financial troubles, and ongoing battles with addiction and emotional exhaustion. People close to her often said that Garland loved deeply, sometimes too deeply. She gave her heart completely, hoping each new partner would bring the security she never truly felt growing up in Hollywood. Yet when relationships fell apart, the loneliness that followed could be overwhelming.
One friend later recalled, "Judy could stand in front of thousands of screaming fans and look fearless, but when the curtain closed, she was often the loneliest person in the room." Despite the heartbreak, Garland never stopped believing in love. Each new relationship represented another chance at happiness, another chance to build the life she had always dreamed of. But the truth was painful. While the world adored her voice and celebrated her talent, Judy Garland often spent much of her personal life searching for the kind of love and stability that fame could never give her. Career comebacks and financial problems. After years of personal struggles, health problems, and emotional battles, many people in Hollywood quietly assumed that Judy Garland's career might be over. The industry can be cruel, and it often moves on quickly when a star begins to stumble. But Judy Garland was not just any star. She had something that audiences could feel deep in their hearts, a voice filled with emotion and a presence that could light up an entire room. And just when some thought she had faded away, Garland reminded the world exactly who she was. In 1954, she made one of the most powerful comebacks in Hollywood history when she starred in the film A Star is Born. From the moment the movie premiered, critics and audiences were stunned. Garland didn't just act in the film, she poured her entire soul into the role. Her performance was raw, emotional, and incredibly real. Every song she sang felt personal, almost like she was telling her own story through the character. Many critics called it the greatest performance of her career. Some even believed it was one of the most powerful performances ever captured on film. For a moment, it seemed like everything was finally turning around for her. But behind the applause and standing ovations, Garland's life was still filled with challenges. Despite her enormous fame and legendary talent, she struggled deeply with money. Over the years, poor financial decisions, expensive lifestyles, and unreliable business management had taken a serious toll on her finances. Garland often trusted the wrong people to handle her money, and those mistakes added up quickly. There were times when she owed large amounts of taxes. At other moments, she found herself performing constantly just to keep up with bills and debts. Even though audiences around the world adored her, the financial stability many people assumed she had simply wasn't there. It created a painful contradiction. On stage, Judy Garland looked like a shining star, confident, powerful, and unforgettable. But offstage, she was often exhausted, worried, and trying to hold her life together. Still, one thing never changed. No matter how difficult things became, when Garland stepped into the spotlight, something magical happened. The struggles, the stress, the heartbreak, for a few moments, it all disappeared, and the world saw the performer they would never forget. Her early death. The story of Judy Garland is one of dazzling talent, relentless pressure, and a lifetime spent fighting battles most fans never saw. By the late 1960s, the woman who had once captivated the world in The Wizard of Oz was still performing, still singing with that unmistakable voice. But the years had taken a heavy toll. Garland had spent nearly her entire life in the spotlight. From childhood, Hollywood demanded everything from her: long hours, strict control over her appearance, and endless performances. For decades, she pushed forward through exhaustion, heartbreak, and personal struggles, always returning to the stage because performing was the one place she felt truly alive. But behind the applause, her health had become fragile. By 1969, Garland was living in London with her fifth husband, Mickey Deans. She had moved there hoping for a fresh start. In many ways, London welcomed her warmly. Fans still adored her, and she continued performing in clubs and theaters where audiences packed the rooms just to hear her sing. Even after everything she had been through, her voice still carried the emotion that made people fall in love with her decades earlier. Yet the years of stress, exhaustion, and reliance on medication had weakened her body. On June 22, 1969, tragedy struck. Judy Garland died at just 47 years old after an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. The news spread quickly across the world, and for millions of fans, it felt impossible to believe. The vibrant performer who had once danced down the yellow brick road was suddenly gone. Her death sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Crowds gathered to mourn her, and tributes poured in from fellow performers and devoted fans. Many people felt that Garland's life represented both the beauty and the cruelty of fame. How someone could bring joy to so many people while quietly suffering behind the scenes. Her funeral in New York drew enormous crowds. Thousands of grieving fans lined the streets, many holding flowers, others simply standing in silence. For them, Garland was more than just a star. She was a symbol of resilience, vulnerability, and raw emotional power. Today, Judy Garland is remembered not just for the tragedy of her life, but for the extraordinary brilliance she shared with the world. Her voice, her performances, and her ability to connect with audiences remain unforgettable. And decades later, when people hear her sing, it's as if a piece of her spirit is still there, reminding the world why Judy Garland will always be one of entertainment's most unforgettable legends. When people talk about the most heartbreaking stories in Hollywood history, the name Judy Garland almost always comes up. Her life is often described as tragic, not because she lacked talent, but because she had so much of it, and the world demanded too much from her far too early. Judy Garland wasn't just another performer. She was a once-in-a-generation talent. Her voice could move people to tears, her acting felt real and honest, and when she stepped onto a stage, audiences couldn't look away. At just 17 years old, she became a global sensation after starring in The Wizard of Oz, singing the unforgettable song Over the Rainbow. Overnight, she became one of the biggest stars in the world. Her story is remembered as both brilliant and heartbreaking, a reminder of how a shining star can illuminate the world while quietly burning out behind the scenes.